a series of productions complete in small compass, which have been accepted as classics of their kind. For full list see end of this volume, Mifflin and Co. Mifflin and Co. Messrs. Hawthorne, Mifflin and Co., the publishers of the complete works of James Russell Lowell. Reader, walk up at once, it will soon be too late. And I like as a thing that the reader's first fancy may strike, such as presents a tabular view of the volume's contents, who accompanies himself with a rub-a-dub-dub full of spirit and grace on the top of the tub. October, the 21st day, in the year 48. Prefatory note. This jeu d'esprit was extemporized, I may fairly say, so rapidly was it written, purely for my own amusement, and with no thought of publication. I sent daily installments of it to a friend in New York, the late Chase F. Briggs. He urged me to let it be printed, and I at last consented to its anonymous publication. The secret was kept till after several persons had laid claim to its authorship. It being the commonest mode of procedure, I premise a few candid remarks. To the reader. This trifle, begun to please only myself and my own private fancy, was laid on the shelf. But some friends who had seen it induced me, by dint of saying they liked it, to put it in print. That is, having come to that very conclusion, I asked their advice, went, would make no confusion, for though in the gentlest of ways they had hinted it was scarce worth the while, I should doubtless have printed it. I began it, intending a fable, a frail, slender thing, rimy-winged, with a sting in its tail. But by addings and alterings not previously planned, digressions chance hatched like birds' eggs in the sand, and dawdlings to suit every whimsy's demand, always freeing the bird which I held in my hand, for the two perched, perhaps out of reach, in the tree. It grew by degrees to the size which you see. I was like the old woman that carried the calf, and my neighbors, like hers no doubt, wonder and laugh. And when my strained arms with their grown burthen full, I call it my fable, they call it a bull. Having scrawled at full gallop as far as that goes, in a style that is neither good verse nor bad prose, and being a person whom nobody knows, some people will say I am rather more free with my readers than it is becoming to be, but I seem to expect them to wait on my leisure in following wherever I wander at pleasure. That, in short, I take more than a young author's lawful ease, and laugh in a queer way, so like Mephistopheles, that the public will doubt, as they grope through my rhythm, if in truth I am making fun of them or with them. So the excellent public is hereby assured that the sale of my book is already secured. For there is not a poet throughout the whole land but will purchase a copy or two out of hand, in the fond expectation of being amused in it by seeing his betters cut up and abused in it. Now, I find, by a pretty exact calculation, there are something like 10,000 bards in the nation, of that special variety whom the review and magazine critics call lofty and true, and about 30,000. This tribe is increasing, of the kinds who are termed full of promise and pleasing. The public will see by a glance at this schedule that they cannot expect me to be over-sedulous about courting them, since it seems I have got enough fuel made sure of for boiling my pot. As for such of our poets as find not their names mentioned once in my pages with praises or blames, let them send in their cards without further delay to my friend G. P. Putnam, Esquire, in Broadway, where a list will be kept with the strictest regard to the day and the hour of receiving the card. Then, taking them up as I chance to have time, that is, if their names can be twisted in rhyme, I will honestly give each his proper position, at the rate of one author to each new edition. Thus a premium is offered sufficiently hidge, as the magazines say when they tell their best lie, to induce bards to club their resources and buy the balance of every edition, until they have all of them fairly been run through the mill. One word to such readers, judicious and wise, as read books with something behind the mere eyes, of whom in the country perhaps there are two, including myself, gentle reader, and you. All the characters sketched in this slight jeu d'esprit, though it may be they seem, here and there, rather free and drawn from a somewhat too cynical standpoint, are meant to be faithful, for that is the grand point, and none but an owl would feel sore at a rub from a jester who tells you, without any subterfuge, that he sits in Diogenes' tub. A preliminary note to the second edition. Though it well may be reckoned of all composition the species at once most delightful and healthy, is a thing which an author, unless he be wealthy and willing to pay for that kind of delight, is not in all instances called on to write, though there are, it is said, who, their spirits to cheer, slip in a new title page 3 times a year, and in this way snuff up an imaginary savor of that sweetest of dishes, the popular favor, much as if a starved painter should fall to and treat Ugolino inside to a picture of meat. You remember, if not, pray turn backward and look, that, in writing the preface which ushered my book, I treated you, excellent public, not merely with a cool disregard, but downright cavalierly. Now I would not take back the least thing I then said, though I thereby could butter both sides of my bread, for I never could see that an author owed aught to the people he solaced, diverted, or taught. And as for mere fame, I have long ago learned that the persons by whom it is finally earned are those with whom your verdict weighed not a pin, unsustained by the higher court sitting within. But I wander from what I intended to say, that you have, namely, shown such a liberal way of thinking and so much aesthetic perception of anonymous worth in the handsome reception you gave to my book, spite of some private piques, having bought the first 1,000 in barely 2 weeks, that I think, past a doubt, if you measured the fizz of yours most devotedly, wonderful quiz, you would find that its vertical section was shorter, by 1 2/10 inches, or 'twixt that and 1/4. You have watched a child playing. In those wondrous years when belief is not bound to the eyes and the ears, and the vision divine is so clear and unmarred that each baker of pies in the dirt is a bard? Give a knife and a shingle, he fits out a fleet, and on that little mud puddle over the street his fancy, in purest good faith, will make sail round the globe with a puff of his breath for a gale, will visit in barely 10 minutes all climes, and do the Columbus feat hundreds of times. Or suppose the young poet fresh stored with delights from that Bible of childhood, the Arabian Nights, he will turn to a crony and cry, "Jack, let's play that I am a genius." Jackie straightway makes Aladdin's lamp out of a stone, and for hours they enjoy each his own supernatural powers. This is all very pretty and pleasant, but then suppose our 2 urchins have grown into men, and both have turned authors. One says to his brother, "Let's play, we're the American somethings or other, say Homer or Sophocles, Goethe or Scott. Only let them be big enough no matter what. Come, you shall be Byron or Pope, which you choose. I'll be Coleridge, and both shall write mutual reviews." So they both, as mere strangers, before many days send each other a chord of anonymous bays. Each, piling his epithets, smiles in his sleeve to see what his friend can be made to believe. Each, reading the other's unbiased review, thinks, "Here's pretty high praise, but no more than my due." Well, we laugh at them both, and yet make no great fuss when the same farce is acted to benefit us. Even I, who, if asked, scarce a month since, what fudge meant, should have answered, "The dear public's critical judgment," begin to think sharp-witted Horace spoke sooth when he said that the public sometimes hit the truth. In reading these lines, you perhaps have a vision of a person in pretty good health and condition, and yet, since I put forth my primary edition, I have been crushed, scorched, withered, used up, and put down. By Smith, with the cordial assistance of Brown. In all, if you put any faith in my rhymes, to the number of 95 several times, and, while I am writing, I tremble to think of it, for I may at this moment be just on the brink of it. Molybdostum, angry at being omitted, has begun a critique. Am I not to be pitied? Now I shall not crush them, since indeed, for that matter, no pressure I know of could render them flatter, nor wither nor scorn them. No action of fire could make either them or their articles drier, nor waste time in putting them down. I am thinking not their own self-inflation will keep them from sinking, for there's this contradiction about the whole bevy. Though without the least weight they are awfully heavy. Though without the least weight they are awfully heavy. No, my dear honest boar, surdo fabulum naris, they are no more to me than a rat in the arus. I can walk with the doctor, get facts from the Don, or draw out the lambish quintessence of John, and feel nothing more than a half-comic sorrow to think that they all will be lying to. Morrow tossed carelessly up on the waste-paper shelves and forgotten by all but their half-dozen selves. Once snug in my attic, my fire in a roar, I leave the whole pack of them outside the door. With hacklet or purchase I wander away to the black northern seas, or barbaric Cathay, get fou with O'Shanter, and sober me then with that builder of brick kilnish dramas, rare Ben, Snuff, Herbert as holy as a flower on a grave, with Fletcher wax tender, or Chapman grow brave, with Marlowe or Kidd take a fine poet rave, in very most Hebrew of Saxons, find peace, with Lycidas welter on vexed Irish seas, with Webster grow wild, and climb earthward again, down by mystical Brown's Jacob's ladder-like brain, to that spiritual Pepys Cotton's version Montaigne, find a new depth in Wordsworth undreamed of. Or, out of my study the scholar thrown off, nature holds up her shield, 'gainst the sneer and the scoff. The landscape, forever consoling and kind, pours her wine and her oil on the smarts of the mind. The waterfall, scattering its vanishing gems, the tall grove of hemlocks with moss on their stems, like plashes of sunlight, the pond in the woods where no foot but mine and the bitterns intrudes, where pitcher plants purple and gentians hard by recall to September the blue of June's sky. These are all my kind neighbors, and leave me no wish to say aught to you all, my poor critics, but pish! I've buried the hatchet, and twisting an allumette out of one of you now, and relighting my calumet. In your private capacities, come when you please, I will give you my hand and a fresh pipe apiece. As I ran through the leaves of my poor little book to take a fond author's first tremulous look, it was quite an excitement to hunt the errata, sprawled in as birds' tracks are in some kinds of strata. Only these made things crookeder. Fancy an heir that a father had seen born, well-featured and fair, turning suddenly wry-nosed, club-footed, squint-eyed, hare-lipped, whapper-jawed, carrot-haired, from a pride become an aversion. My case was yet worse. A club foot by way of a change in a verse I might have forgiven, an O's being wry, a limp in an E, or a cock in an I, but to have the sweet babe served in pie. I am not queasy-stomached, but such a Thystean banquet as that was quite out of the question. In the edition now issued, no pains are neglected, and my verses, as orators say, stand corrected. Yet some blunders remain of the public's own make, which I wish to correct for my personal sake. For instance, a character drawn in pure fun and condensing the traits of a dozen in one has been, as I hear by some persons, applied to a good friend of mine, whom to stab in the side, as we walked along chatting and joking together, would not be my way. I can hardly tell whether a question will ever arise in which he and I should by any strange fortune agree. But meanwhile my esteem for him grows as I know him, and, though not the best judge on earth of a poem, he knows what it is he is saying and why, and is honest and fearless, two good points which I have not found so rife I can easily smother my love for them, whether on my side or to t'other. From my other anonymy you may be sure that I know what is meant by a caricature and what by a portrait. There are those who think it is capital fun to be spattering their ink on quiet, unquarrelsome folk, but the minute the game changes sides and the others begin it, they see something savage and horrible in it. As for me, I respect neither women nor men for their gender, nor own any sex in a pen. I choose just to hint to some causeless unfriends that, as far as I know, there are always two ends, and one of them heaviest, two to a staff, and two parties also to every good laugh. A fable for critics. Phoebus, sitting one day in a laurel tree's shade, was reminded of Daphne, of whom it was made. For the god being one day too warm in his wooing, she took to the tree to escape his pursuing. Be the cause what it might, from his offer she shrunk, and, Ginevra-like, shut herself up in a trunk. And, though 'twas a step into which he had driven her, he somehow or other had never forgiven her, he somehow or other had never forgiven her. Her memory he nursed as a kind of a tonic, something bitter to chew when he'd play the Byronic, and I can't count the obstinate nymphs that he brought over. By a strange kind of my case is like Dido's, he sometimes remarked. When I last saw my love, she was fairly embarked in a laurel, as she thought. But how fate mocks! She has found it by this time a very bad box. Let hunters from me take this saw when they need it. You're not always sure of your game when you've treed it. Just conceive such a change taking place in one's mistress. What romance would be left? Who can flatter or kiss trees? And for mercy's sake, how could one keep up a dialogue with a dull wooden thing that will live and will die a log? Not to say that the thought would forever intrude, that you've less chance to win her the more she is wood. It went to my heart, and the memory still grieves, to see those loved graces all taking their leaves, those charms beyond speech, so enchanting, but now, as they left me forever, each making its bow. If her tongue had a tang sometimes more than was right, her new bark is worse than 10 times her old bite. Now, Daphne, before she was happily treeified, over all other blossoms the lily had deified, and when she expected the god on a visit, 'twas before he had made his intentions explicit. Some buds she arranged with a vast deal of care, to look as if artlessly twined in her hair, where they seemed, as he said when he paid his addresses, like the day breaking through the long night of her tresses. So whenever he wished to be quite irresistible, like a man with 8 trumps in his hand at a whist table, I feared me at first that the rhyme was untwistable, though I might have lugged in an allusion to Christabel. He would take up a lily and gloomily look in it. Well, here, after all the bad rhyme I've been spinning, I've got back at last to my story's beginning. Sitting there, as I say, in the shade of his mistress, as dull as a volume of old Chester mysteries, or as those puzzling specimens which, in old histories, we read of his verses. The oracles, namely. I wonder the Greeks should have swallowed them tamely, for one might bet safely whatever he has to risk, they were laid at his door by some ancient Miss Asterisk, and so dull that the men who retailed them outdoors got the ill name of augurs because they were bores. Would induce a mustache, for you know he's imberbous. Then he shuddered to think how his youthful position I'd make such proceeding felonious. Have they all of them slept in the cave of Trophonius? Look well to your seat, 'tis like taking an airing on a corduroy road, and that out of repairing. It leads one, 'tis true, through the primitive forest, grand natural features. But then one has no rest, you just catch a glimpse of some ravishing distance, when a jolt puts the whole of it out of existence. Why not use their ears, if they happen to have any? Here the laurel leaves murmured the name of poor Daphne. Oh, weep with me, Daphne, he sighed, for you know it's a terrible thing to be pestered with poets. But, alas, she is dumb, and the proverb holds good, she never will cry till she's out of the wood. What wouldn't I give if I never had known of her? 'Twere a kind of relief had I something to groan over. If I had but some letters of hers, now, to toss over, I might turn for the nonce, a Byronic philosopher, and bewitch all the flats by bemoaning the loss of her. One needs something tangible, though, to begin on, a loom, as it were, for the fancy to spin on. What boots all your grist? It can never be ground till a breeze makes the arms of the windmill go round, or, if 'tis a water-mill, alter the metaphor, and say it won't stir, save the wheel be well wet afore, or lug in some stuff about water so dreamily. It is not a metaphor, though, 'tis a simile. A lily, perhaps, would set my mill a-going. for just at this season I think they are blowing. Here, somebody, fetch one not very far. Hence they're in bloom by the score, 'tis but climbing a fence. There's a poet hard by, who does nothing but fill his whole garden from one end to t'other with lilies, a very good plan, were it not for satiety. One longs for a weed here and there for variety, though a weed is no more than a flower in disguise, which is seen through at once if love give a man eyes. Now there happened to be among Phoebus's followers a gentleman, one of the omnivorous swallowers, who bolt every book that comes out of the press without the least question of larger or less, whose stomachs are strong at the expense of their head. For reading new books is like eating new bread. One can bear it at first, but by gradual steps he is brought to death's door of a mental dyspepsy. On a previous stage of existence, our hero had ridden outside with the glass below zero. He had been, 'tis a fact you may safely rely on, of a very old stock, a most eminent scion, a stock all fresh quacks their fierce boluses ply on, who stretch the new boots, earth's unwilling to try on, whom humbugs of all shapes and sorts keep their eye on, whose hair's in the mortar of every new Zion, who, when whistles are dear, go directly and buy one, who think slavery a crime that we must not say fie on, who hunt, if they e'er hunt at all, with the lion. Though they hunt lions also, whenever they spy one, who contrive to make every good fortune a wry one, and at last choose the hard. Though kicked and abused by his bipedal betters, yet he filled no mean place in the kingdom of letters. Far happier than many a literary hack, he bore only paper-mill rags on his back. For it makes a vast difference which side the mill one expends on the paper, his labor and skill. So, when his soul waited a new transmigration, and destiny balanced twixt this and that station, not having much time to expend upon bothers, remembering he'd had some connection with authors, and considering his 4 legs had grown paralytic, she set him on 2, and he came forth a critic. Through his babyhood no kind of pleasure he took in any amusement but tearing a book. For him there was no intermediate stage. From babyhood up to straight-laced middle age, there were years when he didn't wear coat-tails behind. But a boy he could never be rightly defined, like the Irish good folk, though in length scarce a span. From the womb he came gravely, a little old man, while other boys' trousers demanded the toil of the motherly fingers on all kinds of soil, red, yellow, brown, black, clayey, gravelly, loamy. He sat in the corner and read Viri Roma. He never was known to unbend or to revel once in base, marbles, hockey, or kick up the devil once. He was just one of those who excite the benevolence of your old prigs who sound the soul's depths with a ledger, and are on the lookout for some young men to edger. Kate, as they call it, who won't be too costly, and who'll afterward take to the ministry mostly, who always wear spectacles, always look bilious, always keep on good terms with each materfamilias throughout the whole parish, and manage to rear 10 boys like themselves on 400 a year, who, fulfilling in turn the same fearful conditions, either preach through their noses. In this way our hero got safely to college, where he bolted alike both his commons and knowledge, a reading machine always wound up and going. He mastered whatever was not worth the knowing, appeared in a gown with black waistcoat of satin, to spout such a Gothic oration in Latin that Tully could never have made out a word in it, though himself was the model the author preferred in it, and grasping the parchment which gave him in fee all the mystic and so forths contained in A.B., he was launched. Life is always compared to a sea, with just enough learning and skill for the using it, to prove he'd a brain by forever confusing it. So worthy Saint Benedict, piously burning with the holiest zeal against secular learning, nesciensque scienter, as writers express it, indoctusque sapienter, aroma recessit, would be endless to tell you the things that he knew, each a separate fact, undeniably true, but with him or each other they'd nothing to do, no power of combining, arranging, discerning, digested the masses he learned into learning. There was one thing in life he had practical knowledge for, and this, you will think, he need scarce go to college for. Not a deed would he do, nor a word would he utter, till he'd weighed its relations to plain bread and butter. When he left Alma Mater, he practiced his wits. In compiling the journal's historical bits of shops broken open, men falling in fits, great fortunes in England bequeathed to poor printers, and cold spells, the coldest for many past winters. Then, rising by industry, knack, and address, got notices up for an unbiased press, with a mind so well poised it seemed equally made for applause or abuse, just which chanced to be paid for. From this point his progress was rapid and sure, to the post of a regular heavy reviewer. The 50th edition, Bishtisis, edition, he peaches, he codition, he could force, and his safe edition, he could patient, he could fool swoors, he could gauge the old books by the old set of rules, and his very old nothings pleased very old fools. But give him a new book, fresh out of the heart, and you put him a new book, fresh out of the heart, and you put him at sea without compass or chart. His blunders aspired to the rank of an art, for his lore was engraft, something foreign that grew in him, exhausting the sap of the native and true in him, so that when a man came with a soul that was new in him, carving new forms of truth out of nature's old granite, new and old at their birth, like Laverio's blesch standard of. As I said, he was never precisely unkind. The defect in his brain was just absence of mind. If he boasted, 'twas simply that he was self-made, a position which I, for one, never gainsaid, my respect for my Maker, supposing a skill in his works which our hero would answer but ill, and I trust that the mold which he used may be cracked, or he, made bold by success, may enlarge his phylactery, and set up a kind of a man-manufactory, an event which I shudder to think about, seeing that man is a moral, accountable being. He meant well enough, but was still in the way, as dunces still are, let them be where they may. Indeed, they appear to come into existence to impede other folks with their awkward assistance. If you set up a dunce on the very North Pole, all alone with himself, I believe on my soul he'd manage to get betwixt somebody's shins, and pitch him down bodily, all in his sins, to the grave polar bears sitting round on the ice, all shortening their grace to be in for a slice. Or if he found nobody else there to pother, why, one of his legs would just trip up the other, for there's nothing we read of in Torture's inventions like a well-meaning dunce with a terrible fellow to meet in society. Not the toast that he buttered was ever so dry at tea. There he'd sit at the table and stir in his sugar, crouching close for a spring, all the while like a cougar. Be sure of your facts, of your measures and weights, of your time. He's as fond as an Arab of dates, you'll be telling, perhaps in your comical way, of something you've seen in the course of the day. And, just as you're tapering out the conclusion, you venture an ill-fated classic allusion. The girls have all got their laughs ready when, whack, the cougar comes down on your thunderstruck back. You had left out a comma, your Greeks put in joint, and pointed at cost of your story's whole point. In the course of the evening you find chance for certain soft speeches to Anne in the shade of the curtain. You tell her your heart can be likened to one flower, and that, O most charming of women's the sunflower, which turns. Here a clear nasal voice, to your terror, from outside the curtain says, "That's all an error. As for him, he's, no matter, he never grew tender, sitting after a ball with his feet on the fender, shaping somebody's sweet features out of cigar smoke. Though he'd willingly grant you that such doings are smoke, all women he damns with nutile semper, and if ever he felt something like love's distemper, 'twas towards a young lady who spoke ancient Mexican, and assisted her father. Now, Apollo, who finds it convenient sometimes to get his court clear of the makers of rhymes, the genus, I think it is called, irritabile, every one of whom thinks himself treated most shabbily, and nurses a what is it? Apollo, I perforce, had a savant and tacting, though he sassed a shrine of crushes as verses a shrine. If any poor devil but look at a laurely, a say being sick of their rioting, though he sometimes acknowledged their verse had a quieting effect after dinner, and seemed to suggest a retreat to the shrine of tranquil siesta, kept our hero at hand, who by means of a bray which he gave to the life drove the rabble away, and if that wouldn't do, he was sure to succeed if he took his review out and offered to read. Or, failing in plans of this milder description, considering that authorship wasn't a rich craft, to print the American drama of witchcraft. To print the American drama of witchcraft. Stop! With their hands or their ears, scream the muses. He may go off and murder himself if he chooses. 'Twas a mean self-defense only sanctioned his trying. 'Tis mere massacre now that the enemy's flying. If he's forced to't again, and we happen to be there, give us each a large handkerchief soaked in strong ether. I called this a fable for critics. You think it's more of a display of my rhythmical trinkets, my plot like an icicle slender and slippery, every moment more slender and likely to slip awry, and the reader unwilling in loco desipere is free to jump over as much of my flippery as he fancies, and, if he's a provident skipper, he may have like Odysseus control of the gales, and get safe to port ere his patience quite fails. Moreover, although 'tis a slender return for your toil and expense, yet my paper will burn, and if you have manfully struggled thus far with me, you may e'en twist me up and just light your cigar with me, if too angry for that. The first verse somehow ends with victoire, as dispersant partout et ses membres et sa gloire, or if I were over-desirous of earning a repute among noodles for classical learning, I could pick you a score of allusions, I whiz, as new as the jests of Didascalos 'tis. Better still, I could make out a good solid list, from authors recondite who do not exist, but that would be naughty. At least I could twist something out of Absyrtus, or turn your inquiries, after Milton's prose metaphor drawn from Osiris. But, as Cicero says, he won't say this or that. A fetch, I must say, most transparent and flat, after saying whate'er he could possibly think of. I simply will state that I pause on the bridge. I'd apologize here for my many digressions, were it not that I'm certain to trip into fresh ones. 'Tis so hard to escape if you get in their mesh once. Just reflect, if you please, how 'tis said by Horatius, that Maeonides nods now and then, and, my gracious, it certainly does look a little bit ominous when he gets under way with ton dathame bomenos. Here, something occurs which I'll just clap a rhyme to and say it myself, ere Zoilus have time to. Any author a nap like Van Winkle's may take, if he only contrive to keep readers awake, but he'll very soon find himself laid on the shelf, if they fall a-nodding when he nods himself. Once for all, to return and to stay, will I, nill I, when Phoebus expressed his desire for a lily, our hero, whose homeopathic sagacity with an ocean of zeal mixed his drop of capacity, set off for the garden as fast as the wind, or, to take a comparison more to my mind, as a sound politician leaves conscience behind, and leaped the low fence, as a party hack jumps o'er his principles when something else turns up trumps. He was gone a long time, and Apollo, meanwhile, went over some sonnets of his with a file. For, of all compositions, he thought that the sonnet best repaid all the toil you expended upon it. It should reach with one impulse the end of its course, and for one final blow collect all of its force. Not a verse should be salient, but each one should tend, with a wave-like upgathering, to break at the end. So, condensing the strength here, there, smoothing a wry kink, he was killing the time, when up walked Mr. Starr. Ass. At a few steps behind him, a small man in glasses went dodging about, muttering, "Murderers! Asses!" From out of his pocket a paper he'd take, with a proud look of martyrdom tied to its stake, and, reading a squib at himself, he'd say, "Here I see, 'gainst American letters, a bloody conspiracy. They are all by my personal enemies written. I must post an anonymous letter to Britain, and show that this gall is the merest suggestion of spite at my zeal on the copyright question. For on this side the water 'tis prudent to pull o'er the eyes of the public their national wool, by accusing of slavish respect to John Bull all American authors who have more or less of that anti-American humbug. Success, while in private we're always embracing the knees of some so culling the jibes of each critical scorner, as if they were plums, and himself were Jack Horner. He came cautiously on, peeping round every corner, and into each hole where a weasel might pass in, expecting the knife of some critic assassin, who stabs to the heart with a caricature, not so bad as those daubs of the Sun, to be sure, yet done with a daguerreotype, whose vile portraits disperse all one's good and condense all one's poor trait. Apollo looked up, hearing footsteps approaching, and slipped out of sight the new rhymes he was broaching. Good day, Mr. D. I'm happy to meet, with a scholar so ripe and a critic so neat, who through Grub Street the soul of a gentleman carries. What news from that suburb of London and Paris, which latterly makes such shrill claims to monopolize the credit of being the new world's metropolis? Why, nothing of consequence save this attack on my friend there behind by some pitiful hack who thinks every national author a poor one that isn't a copy of something that's foreign, and assaults the American Dick. Nay, 'tis clear that your Damon there's fond of a flea in his ear, and if no one else furnished them gratis on tick, he would buy some himself just to hear the old click. Why, I honestly think if some fool in Japan should turn up his nose at the poems on man, which contain many verses as fine, by the by, as any that lately came under my eye, your friend there by some inward instinct would know it, would get it translated, reprinted, and show it, as a man might take off a high stock to exhibit the autograph round his own neck of the gibbet, nor would let it rest so, but fire column after column, signed Cato or Brutus or something as solemn, by way of displaying his critical crosses, and tweaking that. Now nobody knows when an author is hit. If he have not a public hysterical fit, let him only keep close in his snug garret's dim ether, and nobody'd think of his foes, or of him either. If an author have any least fibre of worth in him, abuse would but tickle the organ of mirth in him. All the critics on earth cannot crush with their ban one word that's in tune with the nature of man. Well, perhaps so. Meanwhile, I have brought you a book, into which, if you'll just have the goodness to look, you may feel so delighted when once you are through it, as to deem it not unworth your while to review it, and I think I can promise your thoughts, if you do, a place in the next Democratic Review. The most thankless of gods you must surely have thought me. For this is the 44th copy you've brought me. I have given them away, or at least I have tried, but I've 42 left, standing all side by side. The man who accepted that one copy died. From one end of a shelf to the other they reach, with the author's respects neatly written in each. The publisher sure will proclaim a Te Deum when he hears of that order the British Museum has sent for one set of what books were first printed in America, little or big, for 'tis hinted that this is the first truly tangible hope he has ever had raised for the sale of a copy. But stay, here comes Tityrus Griswold, and leads on the flocks whom he first plucks alive and then feeds on, a loud cackling swarm, in whose feathers warm dressed, he goes for as perfect a swan as the rest. There comes Emerson first, whose rich words every one are like gold nails in temples to hang trophies on, whose prose is grand verse, while his verse, the Lord knows, is some of it pro. No, 'tis not even prose, I'm speaking of meters. Some poems have welled from those rare depths of soul that have ne'er been excelled. They're not epics, but that doesn't matter a pin. In creating the only hard things to begin, a grass blade's no easier to make than an oak. If you've once found the way, you've achieved the grand stroke. In the worst of his poems are mines of rich matter, but thrown in a heap with a crash and a clatter. Now it is not one thing nor another alone makes a poem, but rather the general tone. But to come back to Emerson, whom, by the way, I believe we left waiting. His is, we may say, a Greek head on right Yankee shoulders, whose range has Olympus for one pole. For t'other the exchange, he seems, to my thinking, although I'm afraid the comparison must, long ere this, have been made, a Plotinus. Montaigne, where the Egyptian's gold mist, and the Gascon's shrewd wit cheek by jowl coexist, all admire, and yet scarcely 6 converts he's got, 2 I don't. Nor they either exactly know what, for though he builds glorious temples, 'tis odd, he leaves never a doorway to get in a god. 'Tis refreshing to old-fashioned people like me to meet such a primitive pagan as he, in whose mind all creation is duly respected, as parts of himself, just a little projected, and who's willing to worship the stars and the sun, a convert to nothing but Emerson. So perfect a balance there is in his head, that he talks of things sometimes as if they were dead. Life, nature, love, God, and affairs of that sort he looks at as merely ideas, in short, as if they were fossils stuck round in a cabinet, of such vast extent that our earth's a mere dab in it, composed just as he is inclined to conjecture her, namely, 1 part pure earth, 99 parts pure lecturer. You are filled with delight at his clear demonstration. Each figure, word, gesture just fits the occasion. With the quiet precision of science he'll sort 'em. But you can't help suspecting the whole a post-mortem. There are persons, mo blind to the soul's make and style, who insist on a likeness twixt him and Carlyle. To compare him with Plato would be vastly fairer. Carlyle's the more burly, but is the rarer. He sees fewer objects, but clearlier, trulier. If sees as original, E's more peculiar, that he's more of a man, you might say, of the one, of the other. He's more of an Emerson, sees the Titan, as shaggy of mind as of limb. The clear-eyed Olympian, rapid and slim, the one's 2/3 Norseman, the other half Greek, where the one's most abounding, the other's to seek. C's generals require to be seen in the mass, E's specialties gain if enlarged by the glass. C gives nature and God his own fits of the blues, and rims common sense things with mystical hues. E sits in a mystery, calm and intense, and looks coolly around him with sharp common sense. C shows you how everyday matters unite with the dim transdiurnal recesses of night, while E, in a plain preternatural way, makes mysteries matters of mere everyday. C draws all his characters quite à la Fuseli, not sketching their bundles of muscles and thews illy. He paints with a brush so untamed and profuse, they seem nothing but bundles of muscles and thews. E's is rather like Flaxman, lines straight and severe, and a colorless outline, but full, round, and clear. To the men he thinks worthy, he frankly accords the design of a white marble statue in words. C labors to get at the center, and then take a reckoning from there of his actions and men. E calmly assumes the said center as granted, and, given himself, has whatever is wanted. He has imitators in scores, who omit no part of the man but his wisdom and wit, who go carefully o'er the sky blue of his brain, and when he has skimmed it once, skim it again. If at all they resemble him, you may be sure it is, because their shoals mirror his mists and obscurities, as a mud puddle seems deep as heaven for a minute, while a cloud that floats o'er is reflected within it, There comes, for instance, to see him's rare sport, tread in Emerson's tracks with legs painfully short, how he jumps, how he strains and gets red in the face, to keep step with the Mystagob's natural pace. He follows as close as a stick to a rocket, his fingers exploring the prophet's each pocket. Fie, for shame, brother bard, with good fruit of your own, can't you let neighbor Emerson's orchards alone? Besides, 'tis no use, you'll not find e'en a core has picked up all the windfalls before. They might strip every tree, and never would catch 'em. His Hesperides have no rude dragon to watch 'em. When they send him a dishful and ask him to try 'em, he never suspects how the sly rogues came by 'em. He wonders why 'tis there are none such his trees on, and thinks 'em the best he has tasted this season. Yonder, calm as a cloud, Alcott stalks in a dream, and fancies himself in thy groves, Academe, with the Parthenon nigh and the olive trees o'er him, and never an act to perplex him or bore him, with a snug room at Plato's when night comes, to walk to, and people from morning till midnight to talk to, and from midnight till morning, nor snore in their listening, 'twere store in their listening. So he muses, his face with the joy of it glistening, for his highest conceit of a happy estate is, where they'd live upon acorns, and hear him talk gratis, and indeed, I believe, no man ever talked better. Each sentence hangs while he talks he is great, but goes out like a taper. if you shut him up closely with pen, ink, and paper. Yet his fingers itch for him from morning till night, and he thinks he does wrong if he don't always right. In this, as in all things, a lamb among men, he goes to sure death when he goes to his pen. Close behind him is Brownson, his mouth very full, with attempting to gulp a Gregorian bull, who contrives, spite of that, to pour out as he goes a stream of transparent and forcible prose. He shifts quite about, then proceeds to expound that 'tis merely the earth, not himself, that turns round, and wishes it clearly impressed on your mind that the weathercock rules and not follows the wind, proving first, then as deftly confuting each side, with no doctrine pleased that's not somewhere denied. He lays the denier away on the shelf, and then down beside him lies gravely himself. He's the Salt River boatman, who always stands willing to convey friend or foe without charging a shilling, and so fond of the trip that, when leisure's to spare, he'll row himself up if he can't get a fare. The worst of it is that his logic's so strong, that of two sides he commonly chooses the wrong. If there is only one, why, he'll split it in two, and first pummel this half, then that, black and blue. That white's white needs no proof, but it takes a deep fellow to prove it jet black, and that jet black is yellow. He offers the true faith to drink in a sieve. When it reaches your lips there's naught left to believe, but a few gisms that squat 'em like tadpoles, o'erjoyed with the mud at the bottom. There is Willis, all natty and jaunty and gay, who says his best things in so foppish a way, with conceits and pet phrases so thickly o'erlaying 'em, that one hardly knows whether to thank him for saying 'em. Over ornament ruins both poem and prose. Just conceive of a muse with a ring in her nose. His prose had a natural grace of its own, and enough of it too if he'd let it alone. But he twitches and jerks so one fairly gets tired, and is forced to forgive where one might have admired. Yet whenever it slips away free and unlaced, it runs like a stream with a musical waste, and gurgles along with the liquidest sweep. 'Tis not deep as a river, but who'd have it deep? In a country where scarcely a village is found that has not its author sublime and profound, for someone to be slightly shallow's a duty, and Willis's shallowness makes half his beauty. His prose wins along with a blithe, gurgling error, and reflects all of heaven it can see in its mirror. 'Tis a narrowish strip, but it is not an artifice. 'Tis the true out-of-doors with its genuine hearty fizz. It is nature herself, and there's something in that, since most brains reflect but the crown of a hat. Few volumes I know to read under a tree more truly delightful than his A l'Abri, with the shadows of leaves flowing over your book, like ripple shades netting the bed of a brook, with June coming softly your shoulder to look over, breezes waiting to turn every leaf of your book over, and nature to criticize still as you read. The page that bears that is a rare one indeed. The page that bears that is a rare one indeed. He's so innate a cockney that had he been born where plain bare skin's the only full dress that is worn, he'd have given his own such an air that you'd say tea had been made by a tailor to lounge in Broadway. His nature's a glass of champagne with the foam on't, as tender as Fletcher, as witty as Beaumont. So his best things are done in the flush of the moment. If he wait, all is spoiled. He may stir it and shake it, but, the fixed air once gone, he can never remake it. He might be a marvel of easy delightfulness, if he would not sometimes leave the R out of spritefulness, and he ought to let Scripture alone. 'Tis self-slaughter, for nobody likes inspiration and water. He'd have been just the fellow to sup at the Mermaid, cracking jokes at rare Ben with an eye to the barmaid, his wit running up as canary ran down, the topmost bright bubble on the wave of the town. Here comes Parker, the Orson of Parsons, a man whom the Church undertook to put under her ban, the Church of Socinus, I mean, his opinions being so ultra Sinian. They shocked the Socinians. They believed Faith, I'm puzzled. I think I may call their belief a believing in nothing at all, or something of that sort. I know they all went. For a general union of total dissent, he went a step farther. Without cough or hem, he frankly avowed he believed not in them, and, before he could be jumbled up or prevented, from their orthodox kind of dissent he dissented. From their orthodox kind of dissent he dissented. There was heresy here, you perceive, for the right of privately judging means simply that light has been granted to me for deciding on you, and in happier times, before atheism grew, the deed contained clauses for cooking you too. Now at Xerxes and Newt we all laugh, yet our foot with the same wave is wet that mocked Xerxes and Newt, and we all entertain a secure private notion that our thus far will have a great weight with the ocean. 'Twas so with our liberal Christians. They bore, with sincerest conviction, their chairs to the shore. They brandished their worn theological birches, bade natural progress keep out of the churches, and expected the lines they had drawn to prevail, with the fast-rising tide to keep out of their pale. They had formerly damned the pontifical see, and the same thing they thought would do nicely for P, but he turned up his nose at their mumming and shamming, and cared, shall I say, not a D for their damning. So they first read him out of their church, and next minute turned round and declared he had never been in it. But the ban was too small, or the man was too big, for he recks not their bells, books, and candles a fig. He scarce looks like a man who would stay treated shabbily. So for Niscus's son's head, or the features of Rabelais, he bangs and bethwacks them. Their backs he salutes, with the whole tree of knowledge torn up by the roots. His sermons with satire are plenteously verjuiced, and he talks in one breath of Confutzi, Cass, Zerdusht, Jack Robinson, Peter the Hermit, Strap, Dathan, Cush, Pitt, not the bottomless that he's no faith in, Pan, Pillicock, Shakespeare, Paul, Toots, Monsieur Tonson, Aldebaran, Alcander, Benco, Machiavelli, Condorcet, Count d'Orsay, Condor, Say, Ganganelli, Orion, O'Connell, the Chevalier Du. See the memoirs of Sully, Ta, the great toe of the statue of Jupiter, now made to pass for that of Jew Peter by good Romish brass. You may add for yourselves, for I find it a bore, all the names you have ever, or not, heard before, and when you've done that, why, invent a few more. His hearers can't tell you on Sunday beforehand if in that day's discourse they'll be Bibled or Koraned, for he seized the idea, by his martyrdom fired, that all men not orthodox, he species waff what he be, what he doesn't believe in one, while some whole kingdom sank all kingdom crumb, and which, as it were, so to speak, not a crumb would be left if we didn't keep carefully mum. And to make a clean breast, that is perfectly plain that all kinds of wisdom are somewhat profane. Now P's creed, then this may be lighter or darker, but in one thing 'tis clear he has faith, namely, Parker, and this is what makes him the crowd-drawing preacher. There's a background of God to each hard-working feature. Every word that he speaks has been fierily furnaced in the blast of a life that has struggled in earnest. There he stands, looking more like a ploughman than priest, if not dreadfully awkward, not graceful. There is Bryant, as quiet, as cool, and as dignified, as a smooth, silent iceberg that never is ignified, save when by reflection 'tis kindled o' nights with a semblance of flame by the chill northern lights. He may rank, Griswold says so, first bard of your nation. There's no doubt that he stands in supreme isolation. Your topmost Parnassus he may set his heel on, but no warm applauses come. Pew following eel on. He's too smooth and too polished to hang any zeal on. Unqualified merits I'll grant if you choose, he has 'em, but he lacks the one merit of kindling enthusiasm. If he stir you at all, it is just on my soul, like being stirred up with the very North Pole. His very nice reading in summer, but internos, we don't want extra freezing in winter. Take him up in the depth of July, my advice is, when you feel an Egyptian devotion to Isis. But deduct all you can, there's enough that's right good in him. He has a true soul for field, river, and wood in him, and his heart, in the midst of brick walls, or where'er it is, glows, softens, and thrills with the tenderest charities. To you, mortals that delve in this trade-ridden planet, No, to old Berkshire's hills with their limestone and granite. If you're one who in loco ad foco here, Disipus, you will get of his outermost heart, as I guess. A piece, but you'd get deeper down if you came as a precipice, and would break the last seal of its inwardest fountain, if you only could palm yourself off for a mountain. Mr. Quivis, or somebody quite as discerning, some scholar who's hourly expecting his learning, calls B the American Wordsworth, but Wordsworth may be rated at more than your whole tuneful herd's worth. No, don't be absurd. He's an excellent Bryant, but, my friends, you'll endanger the life of your client by attempting to stretch him up into a giant. If you choose to compare him, I think there are two sons fit for a parallel. Thompson and Cowper, I don't mean exactly. There's something of each. There's T's, love of nature, C's penchant to justice. Just mix up their minds so that C's spice of craziness shall balance and neutralize T's turn for laziness, and it gives you a brain, cool, quite fictionless, quiet, whose internal police nips the buds of all riot. A brain like a permanent straitjacket put on. The heart that strives vainly to burst off a butt. But my dear little bardlings, don't prick up your ears. Nor suppose I would rank you and Bryant as peers. If I call him an iceberg, I don't mean to say there is nothing in that which is grand in its way. He is almost the one of your poets that knows how much grace, strength, and dignity lie in repose. If he sometimes fall short, he is too wise to mar his thoughts' modest fullness by going too far. Would be well if your authors should all make a trial of what virtue there is in severe self-denial, and measure their writings by Hesiod's staff, which teaches that all has less value than half. There is Whittier, whose swelling and vehement heart strains the straight-breasted drab of the Quaker apart, and reveals the live man, still supreme and erect, underneath the bemummying wrappers of sect. There was ne'er a man born who had more of the swing, of the true lyric bard, and all that kind of thing, and his failures arise, though he seem not to know it. A semming and which twere offeration tripped simplication, and the twixt simple excitement and pure inspiration, as my Pythoness erst sometimes erred from not knowing if 'twere I or mere wind through her tripod was blowing. Let his mind once get head in its favorite direction, and the torrent of verse bursts the dams of reflection, while borne with the rush of the meter along, the poet may chance to go right or go wrong, content with the whirl and delirium of song. Then his grammar's not always correct, nor his rhymes, and he's prone to repeat his own lyrics sometimes, not his best though, for those are struck off at white heats, when the can that be thy son in the battle's mid-din, preaching brotherly love and then driving it in to the brain of the tough old Goliath of sin, with the smoothest of pebbles from Castelli's spring, impressed on his hard moral sense with a sling. All honor and praise to the right-hearted bard, who was true to the voice when such service was hard, who himself was so free he dared sing for the slave, when to look but a protest in silence was brave. All honor and praise to the women and men who spoke out for the dumb and the downtrodden then. It needs not to name them already, for each I see history preparing the statue and niche. They were harsh, but shall you be so shocked at hard words, who have beaten your pruning hooks up into swords, whose rewards and hurrahs men are surer to gain, by the reaping of men and of women than grain? Why should you stand aghast at their fierce wordy war, if you scalp one another for bank or for tariff? Your calling them cutthroats and knaves all day long doesn't prove that the use of hard language is wrong, while the world's heart beats quicker to think of such men as signed tyranny's doom with a bloody steel pen, while on 4th of July's beardless orators fright one with hints at Harmodius and Aristogeiton. You need not look shy at your sisters and brothers who stab with sharp words for the freedom of others, who stab with sharp words for the loyal and true, who, for sake of the many, dared stand with the few, not of blood-spattered laurel for enemies braved, but of broad, peaceful oak leaves for citizens saved. Here comes Dana, abstractedly loitering along, involved in a Paulo post-future of song, who'll be going to write what'll never be written till the muse, ere he think of it, gives him the mitten. Who is so well aware of how things should be done, that his own works displease him before they're begun? Who so well all that makes up good poetry knows, that the best of his poems is written in prose? All saddled and bridled stood Pegasus waiting. He was booted and spurred, but he loitered debating. In a very grave question his soul was immersed. Which foot in the stirrup he ought to put first, and which foot in the stirrup he ought to put first. And while this point in that he once was the idle man, none will deplore, but I fear he will never be anything more. The ocean of song heaves and glitters before him, the depth and the vastness and longing sweep o'er him. He knows every breaker and shoal on the chart, he has the coast pilot and so on by heart, yet he spends his whole life, like the man in the fable, in learning to swim on his library table. There swaggers John Neal, who has wasted in Maine the sinews and cords of his pugilist brain, who might have been poet, but that in its stead he preferred to believe that he was so already. Too hasty to wait till art's ripe fruit should drop, he must pelt down an unripe and colicky crop. Who took to the law, and had this sterling plea for it. It required him to quarrel, and paid him a fee for it. It required him a fee for it. A man who's made less than he might have, because he always has thought himself more than he was. Who, with very good natural gifts as a bard, broke the strings of his lyre out by striking too hard, and cracked half the note. Ah, men do not know how much strength is in poise, that he goes the farthest who goes far enough, and that all beyond that is just bother and stuff. No vain man matures, he makes too much new wood, his blooms are too thick for the fruit to be good. 'Tis the modest man ripens, 'tis he that achieves, just what's needed of sunshine and shade he receives. Grapes, to mellow, require the cool dark of their leaves. Neal wants balance, he throws his mind always too far, whisking out flocks of comets, but never a star. He has so much muscle and loves so to show it, that he strips himself naked to prove he's a poet, and, to show he could leap art's wide ditch if he tried, jumps clean o'er it and into the hedge to other side. He has strength, but there's nothing about him in keeping. One gets surelier onward by walking than leaping. He has used his own sinews himself to distress, and had done vastly more had he done vastly less. In letters, too soon is as bad as too late. Could he only have waited, he might have been great. But he plumped into Helicon up to the waist, and muddled the stream ere he took his first taste, There is Hawthorne, with genius so shrinking and rare, that you hardly at first see the strength that is there. A frame so robust, with a nature so sweet, so earnest, so graceful, so lithe and so fleet, is worth a descent from Olympus to meet. 'Tis as if a rough oak that for ages had stood, with his gnarled bony branches like ribs of the wood, should bloom after cycles of struggle and scathe, with a single anemone trembly in wrath. His strength is so tender, his wildness so meek, that a suitable parallel sets one to seek. He's a John Bunyan Fouquet, a Puritan teak. When nature was shaping him, clay was not granted. For making so full, the success of her scheme gave her so much delight that she tried it again shortly after in Dwight. Only while she was kneading and shaping the clay, she sang to her work in her sweet childish way, and found, when she'd put the last touch to his soul, that the music had somehow got mixed with the whole. Here's Cooper, who's written 6 volumes to show he's as good as a lord. Well, let's grant that he's so. If a person prefer that description of praise, why, a coronet's certainly cheaper than bays, but he need take no pains to convince us he's not. As his enemies say, the American Scot. Choose any 12 men, and let C read aloud that one of his novels of which he's most proud, and I'd lay any bet that, without ever quitting their box, they'd be all, to a man, for acquitting. He has drawn you one character, though, that is new. One wild flower he's plucked that is wet with the dew of this fresh western world, and, the thing not to mince, he has done naught but copy it, ill ever since. His Indians, with proper respect be it said, are just natty bumpo daubed over with red, and his very long toms are the same useful gnat, rigged up in duck pants and a sou'wester hat. Though once in a coffin a good chance was found to have slipped the old fellow away underground. All his other men figures are clothes upon sticks, the derniere chemise of a man in a fix. As a captain besieged when his garrison's small, sets up caps upon poles to be seen o'er the wall, and the women he draws from one model don't vary, all sappy as maples and flat as a prairie. When a character's wanted, he goes to the task, as a cooper would do in composing a cask. He picks out the staves, of their qualities heedful, just hoops them together as tight as is needful, and, if the best fortune should crown the attempt, he has made at the most something wooden and empty. Don't suppose I would underrate Cooper's abilities. If I thought you'd do that, I should feel very ill at ease. The men who have given to one character life and objective existence are not very rife. You may number them all, both prose writers and singers, without overrunning the bounds of your fingers, and Natty won't go to oblivion quicker than Adams, the parson, or Primrose, the vicar. There is one thing in Cooper I like, too, and that is that on manners he lectures his countrymen gratis, not precisely so either, because, for a rarity, he is paid for his tickets in unpopularity. Now, he may overcharge his American pictures, but you'll grant there's a good deal of truth in his strictures. And I honor the man who is willing to sink half his present repute for the freedom to think, and when he has thought, be his cause strong or weak, will risk t'other half for the freedom to speak, caring naught for what vengeance the mob has in store, let that mob be the upper 10,000 or lower. There are truths you Americans need to be told, and it never'll refute them to swagger and scold John Bull, looking o'er the Atlantic in color. At your aptness for trade says you worship the dollar, but to scorn such dollar tries what very few do, and John goes to that church as often as you do. No matter what John says, don't try to outcrow him. Tea is enough to go quietly on and outgrow him. Like most fathers, Bull hates to see number one displacing himself in the mind of his son, and detests the same faults in himself he'd neglected. When he sees them again in his child's class reflected, to love one another you're too like by half. If he is a bull, you're a pretty stout calf, and tear your own pasture for naught but to show what a nice pair of horns you're beginning to grow. There are one or two things I should just like to hint, for you don't often get the truth told you in print. The most of you, this is what strikes all beholders, have a mental and physical stoop in the shoulders. Though you ought to be free as the winds and the waves, you've the gait and the manners of runaway slaves. Though you brag of your new world, you don't half believe in it, and as much of the old as is possible weave in it, your goddess of freedom, a tight, buxom girl, with lips like a cherry and teeth like a pearl, with eyes bold as Heres and hair floating free, and full of the sun as the spray of the sea, who can sing at a husking or romp at a shearing, who can trip through the forests alone without fearing, who can drive home the cows with a song through the grass, keeps glancing aside into Europe. You steal Englishmen's books and think Englishmen's thought. With their salt on her tail your wild eagle is caught. Your literature suits its each whisper and motion to what will be thought of it over the ocean. The cast clothes of Europe your statesmanship tries, and mumbles again the old blarneys and lies. Forget Europe wholly, your veins throb with blood, to which the dull current in hers is but mud. Let her sneer, let her say your experiment fails. In her voice there's a tremble e'en now while she rails, and your shore will soon be in the nature of things, covered thick with gilt drift, wood of castaway kings, where alone, as it were in a long Oh, my friends, thank your God, if you have one, that he twixt the old world and you set the gulf of a sea. Be strong-backed, brown-handed, upright as your pines. By the scale of a hemisphere shape your designs. Be true to yourselves in this new 19th age, as a statue by Powers or a picture by Page. Plow, sail, forge, build, carve, paint, make all over new, to your own new world. Instincts contrive to be true. Keep your ears open wide to the future's first call. Be whatever you will, but yourselves first of all. Stand fronting the dawn on toil's heaven-scaling peaks, and become my Ahem! Your lightness at present, I shudder to tell o't, is that you have your slaves, and the Greek had his helot. Here a gentleman present who had in his satic more pepper than brains shrieked, "The man's a fanatic, I'm a capital tailor with warm tar and feathers, and will make him a suit that'll serve in all weathers. But we'll argue the point first. I'm willing to reason, palaver before condemnation's but decent. So, through my humble person, humanity begs of the friends of true freedom a loan of bad eggs." But Apollo let one such a look of his show forth, as when "Sao how my anaver au sao anaver," and the gentleman somehow slunk out of the way, but, as he was going, gained courage to say, "At slavery in the abstract my whole soul rebels. I am as strongly opposed to it. But there comes Miranda, Zeus. Where shall I flee to? She has such a penchant for bothering me too. She always keeps asking if I don't observe a particular likeness twixt her and Minerva. She tells me my efforts in verse are quite clever. She's been traveling now, and will be worse than ever, one would think, though. A sharp-sighted noter she'd be. Of all that's worth mentioning over the sea, for a woman must surely see well if she try, the whole of whose being's a capital I, she will take an old notion and make it her own, by saying it or in her sibylline tone, or persuade you 'tis something tremendously deep, by repeating it so as to put you to sleep, and she well may defy any mortal to see through it, when once she has. There is one thing she owns in her own single right. It is native and genuine, namely, her spite, though when acting as censor, she privately blows a censer of vanity 'neath her own nose. Here Miranda came up and said, "Phoebus, you know that the infinite soul has its infinite woe, as I ought to know, having lived cheek by jowl, since the day I was born, with the infinite soul I myself introduced, I myself, I alone, to my land's better life, authors solely my own, who the sad heart of earth on their shoulders have taken, whose works sound a depth by life's quiet unshaken, such as Shakespeare, for instance, the Bible, and Bacon, not to mention my own works. Time's nadir is fleet, and as for myself, I'm quite out of conceit." "Quite out of conceit? I'm enchanted to hear it," cried Apollo aside. "Who'd have thought she was near it? To be sure, one is apt to exhaust those commodities one uses too fast, yet in this case, as odd, it is as if Neptune should say to his turbots and whitings, 'I'm as much out of salt as Miranda's own writings,' which, as she in her own happy manner has said, 'sound a depth, for 'tis one of the functions of lead.' She often has asked me if I could not find a place somewhere near me that suited her mind. I know but a single one vacant, which she, with her rare talent that way, would fit to a T, and it would not imply any pause or cessation. In the work she esteems her peculiar vocation, she may enter on duty today if she chooses, and remain tiring woman for life to the muses." Miranda meanwhile has succeeded in driving up into a corner, in spite of their striving, a small flock of terrified victims, and there, with an eye turned the crank of the universe air, and a tone which, at least to my fancy, appears not so much to be entering as boxing your ears, is unfolding a tale of herself, I surmise, for 'tis dotted as thick as a peacock's with eyes. Apropos of Miranda, I'll rest on my oars, and drift through a trifling digression on boors, for though not wearing earrings in more majorum, our ears are kept bored just as if we still wore 'em. There was one feudal custom worth keeping, at least. Roasted boars made a part of each well-ordered feast. And of all quiet pleasures the very ne plus was in hunting wild boars as the tame ones hunt us. Archaeologians I know who have personal fears of this wise application of hounds and of spears, have tried to make out, with a zeal more than wonted, 'twas a kind of wild swine that our ancestors hunted. But I'll never believe that the age which has strewn Europe o'er with cathedrals, and otherwise shown that it knew what was what, could by chance not have known, spending, too, its chief time with its buff on, no doubt, which beast would improve the world most to thin out. I divide boars myself, in the manner of rifles, into two great divisions, regardless of trifles. There's your smooth bore and screw bore, who do not much vary. In the weight of cold lead they respectively carry. The smooth bore is one in whose essence the mind not a corner nor cranny to cling by can find. You feel as in nightmares sometimes when you slip down a steep slated roof where there's nothing to grip. You slide and you slide, the blank horror increases. You had rather by far be at once smashed to pieces. You fancy a whirlpool below white and frothing, and finally drop off and light upon nothing. Drop off and light upon nothing. The screw bore has twists in him, faint predilections, for going just wrong in the tritest directions. When he's wrong, he is flat. When he's right, he can't show it. He'll tell you what Snooks said about the new poet, or how Fogram was outraged by Tennyson's princess. He has spent all his spare time and intellect since his birth in perusing, on each art and science, just the books in which no one puts any reliance. And though Nemo were told, Horace omnibus sapit, the rule will not fit him, however you shape it, for he has a perennial foison of sappiness. He has just enough force to spoil half your day's happiness, and to make him a sort of mosquito to be with. These sketches I made, not to be too explicit, from two honest fellows who made me a visit, and broke, like the tale of the bear and the fiddle, my reflections on Halleck short off by the middle. I shan't now go into the subject more deeply, for I notice that some of my readers look sleepily. I will barely remark that, mongst civilized nations, there's none that displays more exemplary patience, under all sorts of boring at all sorts of hours, from all sorts of hours, from all sorts of hours, from all sorts of desperate persons than ours. Not to speak of our papers, our state legislatures, and other such trials for sensitive natures. Just look for a moment at Congress. Appalled, my fancy shrinks back from the phantom it called. Why, there's scarcely a member unworthy to frown, neath what Fourier nicknames the Boreal crown. Only think what that infinite bore power could do, if applied with a utilitarian view. Suppose, for example, we shipped it with care to Sahara's great desert and let it bore there. If they held one short session and did nothing else, they'd fill the whole waste with artesian wells. But 'tis time now with pen phonographic to follow, through some more of his sketches, our laughing Apollo. There comes Harry Franco, and, as he draws near, you find that's a smile which you took for a sneer. One half of him contradicts t'other. His wont is to say very sharp things and do very blunt, his manners as hard as his feelings are tender, and a sortie he'll make when he means to surrender. He's in joke half the time when he seems to be sternest. When he seems to be joking, be sure he's in earnest. He has common sense in a way that's uncommon, hates humbug and cant, loves his friends like a woman, builds his dislikes of cards and his friendships of oak, loves a prejudice better than aught but a joke, is half upright Quaker, half downright come-outer, loves freedom too well to go stark mad about her, quite artless. There comes Poe with his raven like Barnaby Rudge, 3/5 of him genius and 2/5 sheer fudge, who talks like a book of iambs and pentameters, in a way to make people of common sense damn meters, who has written some things quite the best of their kind, but the heart somehow seems all squeezed out by the mind, who, but hey, day, what's this? Messieurs Matthews and Poe, you mustn't fling mud balls at Longfellow so. Does it make a man worse that his character's such as to make his friends love him as you think? Oh, much? Why, there is not a bard at this moment alive more willing than he that his fellows should thrive. While you are abusing him thus, even now he would help either one of you out of a slough. You may say that he's smooth and all that till you're hoarse, but remember that elegance also is force. After polishing granite as much as you will, the heart keeps its tough old persistency still. Deduct all you can, that still keeps you at bay. Why, he'll live till men weary of Collins and Gray. I'm not over fond of Greek meters in English. To me rhymes a gain, so it be not too jinglish, and your modern hexameter verses are no more like Greek ones than sleek Mr. Sleek Mr. Pope is like Homer. As the roar of the sea to the coo of a pigeon is, so, compared to your moderns, sounds old Melesigenes. I may be too partial, the reason, perhaps, so 'tis, that I've heard the old blind man recite his own rhapsodies, and my ear with that music impregnate may be, like the poor exiled shell with the soul of the sea, or as one can't bear Strauss when his nature is cloven to its deeps within, deeps by the stroke of Beethoven. But set that aside, and 'tis truth that I speak. Had Theocritus written in English, not Greek, I believe that his exquisite sense would scarce that's not ancient nor modern, its place is apart. Where time has no sway, in the realm of pure art, 'tis a shrine of retreat from earth's hubbub and strife, as quiet and chaste as the author's own life. Well, my friend took this story up just to be sure, as one might a poor foundling that's laid at one's door. She combed it and washed it and clothed it and fed it, and as if 'twere her own child most tenderly bred it, laid the scene of the legend, I mean far away, 'mong the green vales underneath Himalaya, and by artist-like touches laid on here and there, made the whole thing so touching, I frankly declare. I have read it all thrice, and perhaps I am weak, but I found every time there were tears on my cheek. The pole, science tells us, the magnet controls, but she is a magnet to emigrant poles, and folks with a mission that nobody knows throng thickly about her as bees round a rose. She can fill up the carrots and such, make their scope converge to some focus of rational hope, and, with sympathies fresh as the morning, their gall can transmute into honey. But this is not all, not only for those she has solace. O say, vice's desperate nursling adrift in Broadway, who clingest, with all that is left of thee human, to the last slender spar from the wreck of the woman, hast thou not found one shore where those tired drooping feet can reach firm Mother Earth, one full heart on whose beat there's many a beam from the fountain of day that, to reach us unclouded, must pass on its way through the soul of a woman, and hers is wide ope to the influence of heaven as the blue eyes of hope. Yes, a great heart is hers, one that dares to go in to the prison, the slave hut, the alleys of sin, and to bring into each, or to find there, some line of the never completely out, trampled divine of the never completely out. If her heart at high flood swamps her brain now and then, 'tis but richer for that when the tide ebbs again, as, after old Nile has subsided, his plain overflows with a second broad deluge of grain. What a wealth would it bring to the narrow and sour, could they be as what, Irving? Thrice welcome, warm heart and fine brain, you bring back the happiest spirit from Spain, and the gravest sweet humor that ever were there, since Cervantes met death in his gentle despair. Nay, don't be embarrassed, nor look so beseeching. I shan't run directly against my own preaching, and having just laughed at their Raphaels and Dantes, go to setting you up beside matchless Cervantes. But allow me to speak what I honestly feel. To a true poet heart, add the fun of Dick Steele. Throw in all of Addison, minus the chill, with the whole of that partnership's stock and goodwill. Mix well, and while stirring, whom o'er, as a spell, the fine old English gentleman's there goes. But stet nominis umbra, his name, you'll be glad enough some day or other to claim, and will all crowd about him and swear that you knew him, if some English critic should chance to review him. The old porcos ante ne progitiatis, Margaritas, for him you have verified gratis. What matters his name? Why, it may be Sylvester, Judd, Junior, or Junius, Ulysses, or Nestor. For aught I know or care, 'tis enough that I look on the author of Margaret, the first Yankee book, with the soul of down east int, and things farther east, as far as the threshold of morning at least, where awaits the fair dawn of the simple and true, of the day that comes slowly to make all things new. Of the day that comes slowly to make all things new. He has a smack of pine woods, of bare field and bleak hill, such as only the breed of the Mayflower could till. The Puritans shone in it, tough to the core, such as prayed, smiting agog on red Marston Moor, with an unwilling humor half choked by the drouth in brown hollows about the inhospitable mouth, with a soul full of poetry, though it has qualms about finding a happiness out of the Psalms, full of tenderness too, though it shrinks in the dark, hamadryad-like under the coarse shaggy bank, that sees visions, knows wrestlings of God with the will, and has its own Sinais and thunderings still. Here, forgive me, Apollo, I cried, while I pour my heart out to my birthplace. O loved more and more, dear Bay State, from whose rocky bosom thy sons should suck milk, strong, will-giving, brave, such as runs in the veins of old Greylock. Who is it that dares call thee peddler, a soul wrapped in bank books and shares? It is false. She's a poet. I see as I write. Along the far railroad the steam snake glide white. The cataract throb of her mill hearts I hear. The swift strokes of trip hammers weary my ear. Sledges ring upon anvils. Through logs the saw screams. Blocks swing to their place. Beetles drive home the beams. It is songs such as these that she croons to the din of her fast-flying shuttles, year out and year in, while from earth's farthest corner there comes not a breeze, but wafts her the buzz of her gold-gleaning bees. What though those horn hands have as yet found small time for painting and sculpture and music and rhyme? These will come in due order. The need that pressed sorest was to vanquish the seasons, the ocean, the forest, to bridle and harness the rivers, the steam, making those whirl her mill wheels, this tug in her team, to vassalize old tyrant winter, and make him delve surlily for her on river and lake. When this new world was parted, she strove not to shirk her lot in the heirdom, the tough, silent work the heroes share ever, from Heracles down to Odin, the earth's iron scepter and crown. Yes, thou dear, noble mother. If ever men's praise could be claimed for creating heroical lays, thou hast won it. If ever the laurel divine crowned the maker and builder, that glory is thine. Thy songs are right epic, they tell how this rude rock rib of our earth here was tamed and subdued. Thou hast written them plain on the face of the planet. In brave, deathless letters of iron and granite, thou hast printed them deep for all time. They are set from the same runic type, font, and alphabet. With thy stout Berkshire hills and the arms of thy bay, they are staves from the burly old Mayflower lay. If the drones of the old world in querulous ease ask thy art and thy letters, point proudly to these, or if they deny these, our letters and art, toil on with the same old invincible heart. Thou art rearing the pedestal broad, based and grand, whereon the fair shapes of the artist shall stand, and creating, through labors undaunted and long, the theme for all sculpture and painting and song. But my good mother Bay State wants no praise of mine. She learned from her mother a precept divine about something that butters no parsnips her fort. In another direction lies, work is her sport. Though she'll courtesy and set her cap straight, that she will if you talk about Plymouth and Red Bunker's Hill. Dear, notable goodwife, by this time of night her hearth is swept neatly, her fire burning bright, and she sits in a chair of home plan and make, rocking, musing much all the while as she darns on a stocking, whether turkeys will come pretty high next Thanksgiving, whether flour will be so dear, for as sure as she's living, she will use rye and injun then, whether the pig by this time ain't got pretty tolerable big, and whether to sell it outright will be best, or to smoke hams and shoulders and salt down the rest. At this minute she'd swap all my verses, cruel, for the last patent stove that is saving of fuel. So I'll just let Apollo go on, for his fizz shows. I've kept him awaiting too long as it is. If our friend there, who seems a reporter, is done with his burst of emotion, why, I will go on, said Apollo. Some smiled, and indeed I must own there was something sarcastic, perhaps, in his tone. There's Holmes, who is matchless among you for wit, a Leyden jar always full charged, from which flit the electrical tingles of hit after hit. In long poems 'tis painful sometimes, and invites a thought of the way the new telegraph writes, which pricks down its little sharp sentences spitefully, as if you got more than you'd title to rightfully, and you find yourself hoping its wild father lightning would flame in for a second and give you a frightening. He has perfect sway of what I call a sham meter, but many admire it, the English pentameter, And Campbell, I think, wrote most commonly worse, with less nerve, swing, and fire in the same kind of verse, nor e'er achieved aught in so worthy of praise as the tribute of Holmes to the grand Marseillaise. You went crazy last year over Bulwer's New Timon. Why, if B to the day of his dying should rhyme on, heaping verses on verses and tomes upon tomes, he could ne'er reach the best point and vigor of Holmes. His are just the fine hands, too, to weave you a lyric, full of fancy, fun, feeling, or spiced with satiric, in a measure so kindly you doubt if the toes that are trodden upon are your own or your foes. There is Lowell, who's striving Parnassus to climb, with a whole bale of isms tied together with rhyme. He might get on alone, spite of brambles and boulders, but he can't with that bundle he has on his shoulders. The top of the hill he will ne'er come nigh reaching, till he learns the distinction twixt singing and preaching. His lyre has some chords that would ring pretty well, but he'd rather by half make a drum of the shell and rattle away till he's old as Methusalem, at the head of a march to the last New Jerusalem. There goes Halleck, whose Fanny's a pseudo-Don Juan, with the wickedness out that gave salt to the true one. He's a wit, though, I hear, of the very first order, and once made a pun on the word soft recorder. More than this, he's a very great poet, I'm told, and has had his works published in crimson and gold with something they call illustrations, to wit, like those with which Chapman obscured Holy Writ, which are said to illustrate because, as I view it, like Lucas anon, they precisely don't do it. Let a man who can write what himself understands keep clear, if he can, of designing men's hands, who bury the sense, if there's any worth having, and then very honestly call it engraving. But to quit badinage, which there isn't much wit in, Halleck's better, I doubt not, than all he has written. In his verse a clear glimpse you will frequently find, if not of a great, of a fortunate mind, which contrives to be true to its natural loves, in a world of back offices, ledgers, and stoves. When his heart breaks away from the brokers and banks, and kneels in his own private shrine to give thanks, there's a genial manliness in him that earns our sincerest respect. Read, for instance, his Burns, and we can't but regret. Seek excuse where we may that so much of a man has been peddled away. But what's that, a mass meeting? No, they're come in lots, the American Bulwers, Disraelis, and Scots, and in short the American everything else's, each charging the others with envies and jealousies. By the way, 'tis a fact that displays what profusions of all kinds of greatness bless free institutions, that while the old world has produced barely 8 of such poets as all men agree to call great, and of other great characters hardly a score, one might safely say less than that, rather than more. With you every year a whole crop is begotten. They're as much of a staple as corn is, or cotton. Why, there's scarcely a huddle of log huts and shanties that has not brought forth its own Miltons and Dantes. I myself know 10 Byrons, 1 Coleridge, 3 Shelleys, 2 Raphaels, 6 Titians, I think. 1 Apelles, Leonardos, and Rubenses, plenty as lichens. 1, but that one is plenty. American Dickens, a whole flock of lambs, any number of Tennysons. In short, if a man has the luck to have any sons, he may feel pretty certain that 1 out of twain will be some very great person over again. There is one inconvenience in all this, which lies in the fact that by contrast we estimate size, and where there are none except Titans, great stature is only the normal proceeding of nature. What puff the strained sails of your praise will you furl at, if the calmest degree that you know is superlative? 2 dozen of Zistants who gaze us Kaisership daily, Taily Palers who shoot us Hibdaler, 2 dozen of Italy's exiles who shoot us his Kaisership daily, stern pen and ink Brutuses who shoot us his Kaisership daily, stern pen and ink Brutuses who, in Yankee back parlors, with crucified smile, mount serenely their country's funereal pile, 99 Irish heroes, ferocious rebellers, kinds the Saxon in Cismarine garrets and cellars, who shake their dread fists o'er the sea and all that, As long as a copper drops into the hat, 900 Teutonic Republicans stark from Vaterland's battles just won. Here the critic came in, and a thistle presented. From a frown to a smile, the god's features relented, as he stared at his envoy, who, swelling with pride, to the god's asking look, nothing daunted, replied, "You're surprised, I suppose, I was absent so long, but your godship respecting the lilies was wrong. I hunted the garden from one end to t'other, and got no reward but vexation and bother, till, tossed out with weeds in a corner to wither, this one lily I found, and made haste to bring hither." Did he think I had given him a book to review? "I ought to have known what the fellow would do," muttered Phoebus aside. "For a thistle will pass beyond doubt for the queen of all flowers with an ass. He has chosen in just the same way as he'd choose his specimens out of the books he reviews. And now, as this offers an excellent text, I'll give him some brief hints on criticism next." So, musing a moment, he turned to the crowd, and, clearing his voice, spoke as follows aloud. Then the poet broach the hearer the chi, then hearing his lay why, the mort prophet the past, 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 the future, both parts of one whole. Then for him there was nothing too great or too future, both parts of one whole. Then for him there was nothing too great or too small, for one natural design, with as glorious a foresilence that hovers and broods. Zayas swung out the words and broods, the tines, the rivers and woods. He asked not earth's verdict, forgetting the clods. His soul soared and sang to an audience of gods. 'Twas for them that he measured the thought and the line, and shaped for their vision the perfect design, with as glorious a foresight, a balance as versed Mons and Deperd. Then painting, song, sculpture did more than relieve the need that men feel to create and believe. And as in all beauty, who listens with love hears these words oft repeated, beyond and above, so these seem to be but the visible sign of the grasp of the soul after things more divine. They were ladders the artist erected to climb o'er the narrow horizon of space and of time, and we see there the footsteps by which men had gained to the one rapturous glimpse of the never attained, as shepherds could erst sometimes trace in the sod. But now on the poet's disprivaced moods, with do this and do that, the pert critic intrudes, while he thinks he's been barely fulfilling his duty, to interpret twixt men and their own sense of beauty, and has striven, while others sought honor or pelf, to make his kind happy as he was himself. He finds he's been guilty of horrid offenses, in all kinds of moods, numbers, genders, and tenses. He's been a bud, and subjective, what Kettle calls pot, precisely, at all events, what he ought not. You have done this, says one judge, done that, says another. You should have done this, grumbles one, that, says t'other. Never mind what he touches, one shrieks out taboo. And while he is wondering what he shall do, since each suggests opposite topics for song, they all shout together, "You're right, and you're wrong." Nature fits all her children with something to do. He who would write and can't write can surely review, can set up a small booth as critic and sell us his petty conceit and his pettier jealousies. Thus a lawyer's apprentice, just out of his teens, will do for the Geoffrey of 6 magazines. Having read Johnson's Lives of the Poets half through, there's nothing on earth he's not competent to. He reviews with as much nonchalance as he whistles. He goes through a book and just picks out the thistles. It matters not whether he blame or commend. If he's bad as a foe, he's far worse as a friend. Let an author but write what's above his poor scope. He goes to work gravely and twists up a rope, and, inviting the world, pop gun deck at him, and make as he passes its ludicrous peck at him. Here Miranda came up and began. "As to that—" Apollo at once seized his gloves, cane, and hat, and seeing the place getting rapidly cleared, I too snatched my notes and forthwith disappeared. Ariel Booklets 1. The Gold Bug, by Edgar Allan Poe. 2. Rab and His Friends and Marjorie Fleming, by John Brown, M.D. 3. The Culprit Fay, by Joseph Rodman Drake. Our Best Society by George William Curtis. 5. Sonnets from the Portuguese.s by Elizabeth Barrett Browning. 6. The School for Scandal by Richard Brinsley Sheridan. 7. The Rivals... by Richard Brinsley Sheridan. 8. The Good-Natured Man by Oliver Goldsmith. 9. Sweetness and Light by Matthew Arnold. 10. Lyrics by Robert Browning. 11. Allegro and il penseroso. By William M. Thackeray. 14th, She Stoops to Conquer by Oliver Goldsmith. 15th, 18. The House of Life by Dante Gabriel Rossetti. 19. Lays of Ancient Rome by Lord Macaulay. 20. Epictetus, selections from E21. Marcus Aurelius, Thoughts as Simian Lilies by John Ruskin. 22. Wells by John Ruskin. 23. The Rose and the Ring by William M. Thackeray. 24. The Nibelungen Lie. 1 by Thomas Carlyle. 25. Ideas of Truth by John Ruskin. 26. 1 Peats. 27. 20 Keats. 27. 31. Verses and Flyleaves by Charles S. Calverley. 32. Novels by Eminent Hands by W. M. Thackeray. 33. Chivi TV Chivi 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 Chi Chivi 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 Chi Vichbi Chivich Chivichi Vichi Shivi Chi Shaka Chi Fi Vichi She Seeks She Rasslers Jopchi Vichis Shaka Shakespeare's Sonnets. 37. Shakespeare's Sonnets. Chapter 38. She Vich Wit and Humor of Charles Lamb. Chapter 46. The Fables of Etz. 45. The Blessed Damozel by D. G. Rossetti. 46. The Story Without an End by F. W. Caravay. 47. The Rubaiyat of Omar Khayyam. 48. Father Tom and the Pope by Samuel Ferguson. 49. Love and Skates. By Theodore Winthrop. 50. The Princess. By Alfred Tennyson. 51. The Child in the House. By Walter Pater. 52. The Poems of Edgar Allan Poe. 53. The Sonnets of Michelangelo Buonarroti. 54. On Friendship by R. W. Emerson and Marcus Tullius. 58. Some of the Essays of Francis Bacon. The Apology of Socrates, together with the Crito, as recorded by Plato. 60. The Phaedo, the Death of Socrates, as recorded by Plato. Dia 61, 61. 61 to 61 to 60 Po, to 60 S. Doted Boat, to 60 Po, R. Essays of Elia R. by Charles Lamb. 64. The Battle of Dorking, Doted Boo, by Major General George Chesney. 65 to 60 Romanorum, Doted translated by Rev. C. Swan. 66. 1. 66